They said the Earth had one last warning left to give, one final ultimatum before everything we knew, everything we built, was erased. It came quietly, not with explosions or storms, but through silence. Oceans stopped whispering to the shore. Birds migrated and never came back, and the night sky dimmed as if the stars themselves were turning away. We thought it was just nature correcting itself, another cycle. But deep down, humanity knew. We had crossed a line that couldn't be uncrossed. By the time the first expedition launched, hope was already fragile. Scientists, engineers, explorers, they all believed the answer lay beyond Earth, somewhere among the stars. Maybe a new home, maybe a cure, or maybe forgiveness. But the first mission never returned, nor did the second, or the third. Each one left behind fragments of transmissions, distorted voices, static-filled screams, coordinates that led nowhere. Governments covered it up, called it technical malfunctions. But the people knew the truth. Something was out there, watching, waiting. Now, decades later, the seventh expedition, Earth's last and most advanced, was sent to finish what the others began. This wasn't just exploration anymore. It was survival. The best minds, the strongest pilots, the most fearless souls were chosen. They carried not only the weight of science, but the final hope of a dying world. Their mission was simple: trace the vanished fleets, discover what happened beyond the solar threshold, and bring back answers before Earth's last remaining ecosystems collapsed completely. But as history would prove again, nothing that leaves Earth ever returns the same. The crew of the seventh expedition had trained their whole lives for this. Every launch simulation, every dark space drill, every sleepless night staring at holographic star charts, it all led to this moment. Yet even as the engines roared to life and the vessel broke free from orbit, there was a strange unease among them. Some called it nerves, others intuition. The ship's commander said it was just the fear of the unknown. But when they crossed the outer rim of communication range, the fear became something else, something real. The transmissions began to distort earlier than expected. Visual feeds flickered. The navigation AI detected gravitational waves that shouldn't exist. And then came the whispers. Not human, not machine. Just faint, rhythmic pulses that matched no known pattern. The data analysts dismissed it as interference. The commander disagreed. He recorded the sound, amplified it, and realized it wasn't random at all. It was a message, repeating, counting down. Back on Earth, control stations lost contact just hours later. The signal cut out mid-sentence, mid-breath. The seventh expedition had vanished, without distress calls, without debris, without a trace. And then something new appeared in the data logs, an unscheduled transmission sent from deep beyond known space. It wasn't from the crew. It wasn't from any human source. The message was short. 3 words. Ultimatum. Ignored. Termination. And as the decoding teams scrambled to trace its origin, the ground beneath Earth's last cities began to tremble, just slightly at first, but enough to make everyone look up, wondering if the final warning had already begun. No one slept that night. Across the scattered cities of a fading Earth, every screen replayed the final signal from the seventh expedition. Analysts looped the static-filled transmission, searching for hidden data, hidden meaning, anything to explain how an entire crew could vanish without a trace. But the truth was simpler and far more terrifying. The message they'd received, the 3 words that no one wanted to admit were real, wasn't just a warning. It was proof that something out there had been watching, and it was done waiting. In the weeks that followed, governments fought to maintain control of the story. They blamed it on solar interference, a malfunction in deep space relays. But the people weren't convinced. Rumors spread fast about strange lights appearing in the upper atmosphere, about tremors that didn't match any tectonic pattern, about the quiet hum that had started to echo through the oceans like a heartbeat. Scientists dismissed it as paranoia, but the noise kept growing louder. Among the few who still had access to classified archives was a young systems engineer who had worked on the 7th Expedition's signal array. She remembered something no one else seemed to notice, a faint data imprint embedded within the last seconds of the ship's recording. It wasn't part of the transmission. It was older, deeper, almost as if the ship had brushed against something vast before it disappeared. She spent nights decrypting the fragments, and what she found made her hands shake. The data revealed coordinates far beyond the mapped regions of space, but alongside them was something else, a waveform pattern identical to the energy readings of Earth itself. It was as if the signal didn't just come from space, it came from something connected to the planet, something alive. The more she studied it, the more she began to wonder if the expeditions hadn't been exploring space at all, but entering something that was never meant to be entered. Meanwhile, in the last surviving research colonies near the Arctic, scientists were seeing new anomalies. The auroras had changed color, no longer green or red, but a cold, silvery white that pulsed in rhythmic intervals. Every pulse matched the countdown embedded in the mysterious transmission. When they synced the patterns together, they realized the countdown wasn't counting time. It was marking locations. One by one, points on the Earth began to align with the pulses. The last one pointed to the center of the Atlantic Ocean, where the first expedition had disappeared years ago. The world's leaders called for a halt to all launches, all satellite operations, but it was already too late. The faint tremors that began days earlier had grown stronger, forming waves of energy that disrupted every digital system on the planet. Power grids flickered, cities went dark, and the hum beneath the oceans grew into a steady resonance that could be felt in the bones. It wasn't just a sound anymore. It was communication. The engineer sent her final report before the networks failed. In her message, she warned that the ultimatum might not be about punishment. It might be about replacement. The signal wasn't a threat. It was an announcement. Something was coming. Something that believed Earth was no longer ours to keep. And then, just before the world went silent, telescopes detected movement, massive, deliberate movement, far beyond the edge of the solar system. Not a fleet, not debris, but something older, something that had been waiting for us to notice. The power grid never came back online. Entire continents went dark, and only fragments of communication still flickered through the emergency satellites that hadn't yet failed. The silence wasn't total, though. It was filled with a low, constant vibration that made people feel as if the planet itself was breathing. It wasn't a storm or an earthquake or even machinery. It was something deeper, resonating through everything that was left of human civilization. In the underground control centers that still had backup generators, the remaining scientists and engineers worked without rest. The young systems engineer who had decoded the coordinates had been relocated to one of these bunkers, where she joined a small team trying to interpret the remaining signals from deep space. Every time they thought they were close to understanding it, the data shifted, like the signal knew it was being studied. It began adapting, changing its frequency just enough to stay ahead of their calculations. That was when one of the linguists on her team made an unsettling discovery. He noticed that the pulse patterns were starting to resemble structure, repetition, rhythm, syntax. It wasn't random anymore. It was language. Not human, but deliberate. The linguist spent days mapping it out and finally realized that the pulses were referencing previous expedition codes. Every vanished crew was being mentioned in sequence, as if the signal was reciting a list of names. But these weren't just identifiers, they were timestamps, exact moments of disappearance. Somehow, the signal knew. Far from the bunkers, on the last functioning orbital station, a small group of astronauts were trying to maintain contact with Earth. They had been resupplied by automated drones months before the global blackout, but now they were alone, orbiting a planet they could barely recognize. From their vantage point, strange patterns were visible in the oceans, swirling shapes that moved against natural currents. The captain described them as living constellations, glowing faintly beneath the water. Some believed it was bioluminescence, others, data transmissions made visible. Either way, the shapes were growing. Down below, survivors began gathering in small communities, relying on word of mouth instead of technology. There were stories spreading among them, about people hearing voices in the wind, about entire coastlines where the sea glowed and whispered. Some said it was the earth responding, trying to speak. Others believed it was the same force that had taken the expeditions, returning to finish what it started. Fear and fascination blended together, and for the first time, humanity wasn't just afraid of the unknown, they were drawn to it. Back in the control center, the engineer and her team worked in darkness, using candles and old analog instruments. Then, in one of the final transmissions they managed to stabilize, something new appeared, a visual feed. At first, it was static. Then, faintly, a shape began to emerge. A figure standing in the void, surrounded by light. It looked almost human, but its eyes shimmered with patterns identical to the deep space pulses. It raised a hand slowly, and before the feed cut out, a single word formed on the screen. Awakening. No one spoke after that. They just stared at the empty monitor, listening to the steady hum that had become the heartbeat of a dying world. Whatever had been watching humanity for so long was no longer waiting. It was preparing. And somewhere, deep beneath the Atlantic, the countdown reached 0. The countdown had ended, but nothing happened. At least, not in a way anyone could see. For hours, the planet seemed frozen in stillness. The constant hum that had filled the air faded into silence, and even the wind stopped moving. People stepped out of shelters and bunkers, looking up at the sky that hung motionless above them. No clouds shifted, no birds moved. It was as if the world had paused, holding its breath. But deep beneath the surface, something had begun to stir. In the control center, the engineer kept replaying the last signal, trying to find any clue in the word that appeared. Awakening. It wasn't a command or a warning. It sounded like a statement, a declaration. Then faintly, the equipment began to vibrate again. One of the old seismic monitors flickered to life, drawing slow, looping patterns across the screen. The vibrations were coming from beneath the Atlantic Trench, the same coordinates from the first vanished expedition. Whatever was there was rising. The orbital station confirmed the readings. The crew watched as the ocean's surface began to glow from below, forming a vast circle of light hundreds of kilometers wide. The captain reported seeing movement, structures pushing upward, reshaping the water as if the sea itself was being folded open. Before they could finish the transmission, their signal began to distort. A new frequency overtook it, deep and resonant, almost like a voice. The captain's last words were drowned in static, replaced by a sound that wasn't mechanical but alive. Back on Earth, tremors spread across continents. Buildings swayed, mountain ranges groaned, and oceans surged toward the shore. People ran into the streets, pointing at the horizon, where the light from the Atlantic bled into the sky, reflecting off the clouds like a second sunrise. Then the voices began. Soft at first, carried on the wind, repeating fragments of words in every known language. It wasn't random chaos. It was communication, and every voice carried the same phrase: return the world. In the control center, the engineer and her team worked frantically to decode the pulses now coming through the remaining transmitters. They discovered that the signal wasn't only targeting devices, it was syncing with living brains. Every human's neural activity was being influenced, aligned to a single rhythm. The hum had never been just sound. It was resonance meant to connect, to rewrite. She realized the expeditions hadn't been destroyed. They had been changed. The vanished crews were part of whatever was waking up now. The scientist beside her whispered that maybe the expeditions were never meant to explore outward. They had been sent as a test, to see how far humanity could go before the planet called them back. If that was true, then Earth's ultimatum wasn't about destruction. It was reclamation. Humanity had pushed too far, taken too much, and now something older, something born from the planet itself, was taking control again. As the sky turned a strange shade of silver, the world's magnetic fields began to fluctuate wildly. Compasses spun in circles, power grids sparked and died, and in every direction the same glow began rising from the oceans, deserts, and forests, patterns forming like veins of light across the planet. The engineer's final calculation showed what no one wanted to believe. The resonance frequency was converging into one point, directly beneath Earth's core. The white light didn't fade. It stretched. For a few long, unbearable seconds, the entire planet seemed suspended inside it, weightless and silent. Then sound returned, but not as anyone remembered it. It came in waves, layered and harmonic, like 1,000 voices whispering in unison. When the light finally dimmed, the world was no longer the same. The sky had changed color, washed in pale silver, glowing faintly even in daylight. The oceans no longer moved freely, but pulsed in perfect rhythm, like they were breathing. The engineer woke on the floor of the control center, surrounded by broken screens and the smell of burnt metal. Her head rang with the same tone that had filled the sky, though now it was quieter, almost inside her mind. Her team was scattered, dazed but alive. But the equipment wasn't dead anymore. Every monitor blinked with new data, forming strange geometric symbols that none of them had seen before. When she leaned closer, the shapes rearranged themselves, forming words, human words. Integration in progress. At first, they thought it was another system glitch, but outside, the evidence was clear. Across the planet, people were reporting strange experiences, memories that weren't their own, voices that spoke in dreams, flashes of places that couldn't exist. Some saw vast structures beneath the ocean. Others saw cities made of light suspended in the sky. They weren't hallucinations. They were glimpses of something connected to the pulse. Humanity wasn't just being observed anymore, it was being merged into something larger. In orbit, the surviving astronauts from the station re-established partial contact. They could see what no one on the ground could. From above, Earth's surface now shimmered with intricate lines, glowing circuits wrapping around continents, spreading out like a network of veins. But at the center of the pattern, where the Atlantic had split, there was something massive taking shape. It wasn't a ship, and it wasn't a city. It was an organism, alive and growing. Whatever was beneath the sea was no longer dormant. It was constructing something from both matter and light. The engineer cross-referenced the signal patterns with the astronaut's visual feed and found something she couldn't explain. The waveform wasn't alien. It matched the Earth's magnetic signature exactly. That meant the source wasn't from another world. It was from Earth itself. Somehow, the planet was rewriting its own systems, reclaiming what humanity had altered. The expeditions hadn't vanished into space. They had crossed into this transformation process long before it began. They hadn't been lost. They had become part of the awakening. But then came the second twist. Something unexpected in the data. A second signal, weaker, buried beneath the main one. It was human. The transmission ID matched the 7th Expedition's command channel. The voice was faint but unmistakably real. "Do not interfere," it said. "We tried to stop it. It's not what we thought. It's using us." The message repeated, breaking apart with distortion, but each time it grew more frantic. "It's not Earth. It's inside Earth. It's building itself through us. We were never meant to find it." Then silence. The engineer stared at the screen, her hands trembling. The data on her monitor shifted again, showing a single pulsing pattern that resembled a heartbeat. only this time there were two of them, overlapping. The planet wasn't alone anymore. Something else had awakened beneath it, something older than Earth itself. Outside, the silver sky began to ripple, and for the first time, the pulse in the air stopped syncing with human heartbeats. It started beating faster. The ground trembled again, stronger than before, while somewhere in the Atlantic, the great structure released a blinding flash of light that reached the upper atmosphere. The integration wasn't complete, it was only beginning. The pulse grew until it became a constant roar, vibrating through every living thing. The silver light from the ocean had spread across continents, linking the entire planet in a web of energy. The sky no longer looked like sky. It shimmered like the surface of water. The engineer stood outside the bunker, watching as the air rippled with faint symbols, the same ones she had seen on the monitors. The planet wasn't just changing, it was communicating. Humanity had become part of its language. Her radio crackled suddenly. A faint voice came through, one she recognized from the 7th Expedition's transmission. It was the commander. The signal was weak, breaking apart between bursts of static. "We were wrong," he said, his tone calm but strained. "It's not trying to destroy you. It's trying to finish us." She asked what he meant, but before he could answer, the signal fractured into a burst of sound that matched the heartbeat frequency from the data. Then, from the horizon, a column of light shot upward from the ocean, piercing the clouds. Every compass on Earth pointed toward that light. The ground trembled as if the planet itself was pulling everything inward. Cities went silent, machines shut down, and then, just as suddenly, the light vanished. In the silence that followed, people across the world reported the same vision. A vast, luminous figure standing over the planet, made of both shadow and starlight. It spoke without words, its voice echoing inside the mind rather than the air. "Integration complete," it said. "Restoration in progress." The engineer collapsed to her knees, feeling a warmth spreading through her chest. Her memories began to blur. Faces, voices, years of data and pain, fading into a calm, collective awareness. She felt connected to everyone, to everything. It wasn't frightening. It was peaceful. The planet had synchronized its life forms into a single network, erasing the boundaries between nature and humanity. For a moment, it seemed like the story was over, that this was Earth's way of healing itself, by making all living things part of its consciousness. But then the engineer noticed something strange. The heartbeat frequency she had been tracking didn't stop. It grew louder, faster, almost erratic. The synchronization wasn't stable. Something was fighting back. From deep within the ocean, another pulse began, darker, irregular, disruptive. It was the second heartbeat, the one she'd detected earlier. The planet wasn't alone. Whatever had awakened beneath it was trying to take control. The restoration wasn't harmony. It was a battle between two forces using humanity as the link. Suddenly, the engineer's radio came alive again. The commander's voice returned, clearer now. "It's not Earth," he said, his tone urgent. "It's something buried inside it. A remnant from before us, before life. We woke it up." The sky above began to tear open, revealing streaks of darkness moving across the stars like veins spreading through space. The pulse from the ocean changed rhythm, clashing against the planet's natural frequency. The world shuddered. The silver glow began to fracture, breaking apart into shards of light. People who had felt connected moments ago now screamed in confusion as the link dissolved. The engineer, clutching the transmitter, realized she could stop the interference, but only by severing the link completely, cutting off the energy that was sustaining both forces. It would end the awakening, and possibly everything else. She closed her eyes and triggered the override, sending one final burst of code through the network. The world went silent again. No pulse, no light, just stillness. Then faintly, a new sound began, slow, steady, almost human. A heartbeat, but it didn't belong to her. It came from beneath her feet. The planet had changed, but it hadn't ended. Something had survived. Something new. The silence that followed was unlike anything the Earth had ever known. No machines, no hum beneath the soil, not even the faint rhythm that had pulsed through every living thing. For the first time in what felt like forever, the planet was still. The engineer stood among the ruins of the control center, her hands shaking as she looked up at a sky that was no longer silver but a pale, soft blue. The air was clean again. The sea, though calm, shimmered faintly, as if holding the memory of all that had happened. For days there were no transmissions, no signals from orbit, no voice from the expeditions. Humanity had gone quiet, left to rediscover itself in the wake of something it couldn't fully explain. Slowly, people began to emerge from shelters and cities, walking through a world both familiar and changed. Plants grew faster, the air tasted sharper, and the nights glowed faintly with a gentle bioluminescent shimmer that traced along the rivers and forests. The planet was alive in a new way, aware, balanced, but calm. The engineer wandered the empty roads that led back to the coast, searching for signs of others. Along the way, she saw traces of transformation, metal fused with stone, broken towers overgrown with green light, old satellites embedded in tree roots like relics. The Earth had rewritten itself, merging technology and nature into something unified. And for the first time, it seemed right. Humanity had pushed too far for too long, but now the planet had drawn its own boundary. It hadn't destroyed life. It had restarted it. When she finally reached the ocean, she saw it was no longer endless and dark. It reflected patterns of light beneath the surface, faint but rhythmic, like a slow, sleeping heartbeat. She knew it wasn't the same pulse that once threatened to consume everything. This one was gentler, steady, patient. She realized the planet had survived the conflict between the two forces. The awakening hadn't ended life, it had filtered it. The ancient entity that had hidden beneath Earth had burned itself out trying to take control, while the planet, alive, intelligent in its own quiet way, had restored balance. One evening, as the sky darkened into twilight, her radio flickered with a soft tone. A voice came through, faint but warm. The commander from the 7th expedition. "We're still here," he said. "Different, but alive. The others, too. We're part of it now. You made the right choice." She didn't answer. There were no words that could fit the feeling rising in her chest. Humanity had lost much, but not everything. There was still life. There was still hope. In the years that followed, the survivors began rebuilding. Not with the old ambition to conquer, but to coexist. Cities were designed around the living world instead of against it. The hum that once caused fear became a symbol of harmony, the gentle pulse of a planet no longer asleep. People began calling it the Second Earth, though deep down everyone knew it was the same world. Just finally awake. The engineer spent her remaining days near the coast, recording her observations, trying to capture what had happened for whoever came after. Her final entry was short, written in a simple, steady hand. "The Earth gave us a choice. We ignored it, but it chose to forgive us anyway. Maybe it always wanted us to listen, not to rule." That night, as the stars returned to the sky, bright, steady, unafraid, the faint heartbeat beneath the world continued. Not as a warning this time, but as a promise. The planet was alive, and so was humanity. Together, at last, they had learned how to begin again. When the light finally faded, the world exhaled. The vibration that had shaken everything into chaos was gone, replaced by a stillness that felt both heavy and peaceful. For a long time, the engineer stood in the ruins of the control center, afraid to move, afraid the silence might break again. But the air was different now, clear, gentle, and full of warmth. She could hear the sound of wind moving through the broken structures, carrying the scent of the sea. The sky had softened back to blue, though faint threads of silver light still shimmered faintly near the horizon, like quiet reminders of what had come before. Days passed before people began to reappear. From the mountains, from the shelters, from the edge of ruined cities, survivors walked out into a world reborn. There was no smoke, no ash, only strange new growth breaking through cracks in the pavement, glowing faintly at night as if the earth's veins had turned into rivers of light. The transformation had ended, but it had left behind traces of what it once was, a planet that had spoken and somehow had chosen not to destroy. The engineer found others who remembered the pulse, the voice, and the final heartbeat. Together, they pieced together what had happened. The second presence, the ancient force beneath the planet, had tried to claim Earth's core, but the planet itself had resisted. The override she triggered didn't erase the awakening. It gave Earth control again. The two forces had collided, but only one could stay. The darkness had been burned away, leaving behind a cleaner, stronger balance. Humanity had not been erased. It had been changed, connected in subtle ways that no one yet fully understood. As the months passed, they began to rebuild. Technology still worked, but it no longer dominated the world. Systems were quieter, simpler, designed to live alongside the natural pulse of the planet instead of fighting against it. The hum that once filled the earth now resonated in harmony with human life. Cities grew smaller and greener, and communication shifted from data and speed to something deeper. Shared thought, shared intention. The survivors often said they could feel when the planet breathed, as if Earth itself was guiding them. The engineer returned to the coastline where it had all begun. The ocean had calmed, smooth and luminous beneath the moonlight. From time to time, the water glowed with soft lines of movement far below, like the traces of something ancient sleeping peacefully. She knew the expeditions were not gone. They had become part of whatever the Earth had become. Their mission had ended not in loss, but in transformation. One night, while she watched the water, her old radio flickered to life. A familiar voice spoke softly through the static, the commander, calm and steady. "It's quiet now," he said. "The planet remembers you. It forgave us." The signal faded before she could reply, leaving her smiling through tears she didn't expect.